The Nightmare on Elm Street remake
is the bane of my existence.
So yes, I have a rewrite.
We open in the kitchen of the preschool in the 1980s. A woman standing in front of the sink is washing out bowls, and you can hear the sounds of children playing. She looks over to the TV and sees a big breaking news report about daycare workers being discovered to have been abusing the children that they were in charge of. There is an older attendant next to her, and she talks about how something ain't natural. The younger woman looks out the window and sees the gardener Frederick Krueger playing with the children during outside time. The kids are having fun and enjoying his presence, him giving them piggyback rides, lifting them up, swinging them with his arms. However, the older woman mentions that if a man is that close to kids, there's normally only one thing they want. The younger attendant looking back at the television screen, and then we jump to about 12 years later. It is now the 1990s, and Dean walks into the local diner, saying hello to his girlfriend Chris and beginning to chug some coffee. He talks about how for the past week he's been having these really weird dreams. Nancy is there sketching at the same table and asks him had anything happened, and him mentioning how he dug up an old photo from when he was around 4 years old at a preschool he attended. He doesn't remember ever going to this school, but that's definitely him in the photo with a bunch of other kids, and when he brought it up to his mother and father, they both got eerily silent. He said after that, a man has been reoccurringly showing up in his dreams, and it's making him more and more afraid. Nancy and Chris both try to reassure him, and Quentin makes the offhand joke that he should be careful because dreams can be more real than you think. Nancy and Chris, of course, chastise Quentin, and Dean begins to zone out into his coffee, him closing his eyes briefly for them to open again and see that everyone is gone in the diner. He stands up and calls out for anybody and wonders how long he could have dozed off and why they wouldn't have woken him up. However, his throat is then slit by Freddy. In the real world, his head flies back and blood sprays out. There's a wake being held at his house where there's a photo album of, all of Dean's memories, and as the kids are flipping through, they see the picture Dean was talking about all of them at a preschool. Chris, Nancy, and Quentin all recognizing themselves in the photo, them realizing we all went to school together. That night, each of them having a nightmare. At school the next day, they're all discussing it, and they realize they each saw the same man in their dream. Chris's ex-boyfriend, Jess, joins the table, trying to console her about Dean. Nancy asking him if he's had any weird dreams, and he mentions that after the wake, he did. However, when pushed to it, he says it's just a stupid dream, don't worry about it. That day when Chris goes home, she goes up to the attic and begins to loot through all the old memorabilia and photo albums, and realizes they did go to that school together, her having a picture of her own. She takes the physical evidence and confronts her mother with it, and her mother saying how that preschool was not a good place and that it's best to just forget all about it. Chris is freaked out by this, and that night Jess comes to her room and she has her infamous nightmare. After being murdered by Freddy, Jess is of course painted to be the killer and is being hunted down by the police. He goes to Nancy's house not knowing where to turn and demands to know what she knows about this man in their dreams. She's frightened because he's covered in blood, but she says she doesn't know anything. All she knows is that they've all been seeing the same guy. Police sirens are heard outside, and Jess tries to run away, but of course is arrested. Jess, of course, dies in his jail cell. At Chris's funeral, one of the photos shown is the one of the preschool. Nancy rips it off the display and goes and confronts her mother about it, finally getting a name. Badham Preschool, to which her and Quentin go there and see that it's decrepit, nearly torn down, them realizing that it's no longer open, but they might be able to find something at the library. The both of them splitting up at the library and searching for clues, and Quentin falls asleep, him directly encountering Freddy for the first time, who is taunting and tormenting him. However, because Nancy was with him, she's able to pull him out of sleep, but not before he is given 3 scratches on his chest by Freddy. It dawns on Nancy and Quentin the absolute danger that they are in. However, the only thing they could find about the preschool is the fact that the gardener of the school, Freddy Krueger, disappeared. They, however, do find a name of an old co-worker, and they look it up, and she still lives in town, them hoping to talk to her to find out answers. When they get to her house, she is heartbroken to see these kids who are being haunted by a man that she thought she saved them from. She tells them that she used to be one of the daycare attendants and noticed how Freddie acted around them, how he was always wanting to play with them and talk to them. When they push her to know what happened to Freddie, she simply says, "Your parents did what they needed to." Nancy and Quentin don't know what to make of this, however they have a bad feeling. And on the way back from the old coworker's house, Nancy falls asleep. She sees the preschool on fire, hearing a man screaming and begging from the inside. And she turns around to see her mother, as well as all of her friends' parents, watching as the building burns. She hears wood breaking and turns back around to see Freddie has climbed out of the building, him rushing her, and her thankfully waking up before he can grab her. Nancy confronts her mother and demands to know what she did. Her mother confessing that one of the daycare attendants thought that Freddie was molesting them, and her and the other parents took action. Nancy demanding to know if her mother had any proof, and she said yes, after the daycare attendant told us what Freddie did, she brought you to us to tell us yourselves. Nancy is rightly horrified, and as is Quentin. However, Nancy thinks that there could be a chance that Freddie was guilty of what he was accused of, whereas Quentin full-heartedly believes he was an innocent man that was murdered. The next day in class, Quentin falls asleep. However, when he sees Freddie, he tells him he knows he's innocent and that he's sorry about what happened to him. Freddie pausing his attack, backing off, and Quentin waking up. Parallel to this, Nancy is researching the other children that went to the preschool. Her seeing that all of them mention how they remembered going to the school before getting tormented by Freddie. Her realizing that the memory is what brought him back. Quentin telling Nancy how when he said he was sorry and that he asked for forgiveness, Freddie backed off, and he wonders if this could be used to expel him, and Nancy stating she needs to talk to the coworker again. Quentin understands this, but he wonders if they're able to find proof of his innocence, that they could possibly ease this restless spirit that is obviously attacking them. Quentin goes back to the decrepit preschool and looks around for clues. Meanwhile, Nancy goes back to the coworker. She begins to grill her, demanding to know if we as children came to her or if she came to us. Her admitting that they were just confused and that the playtime couldn't have been as innocent as they made it sound. Nancy finally blowing up at her and demanding to know what she means, and her stating she couldn't believe a grown man would actively wish to play with children and not have any sexual attraction attached to it. Nancy now realizing that Freddie was falsely accused. She joins Quentin at the preschool, and while looking around by herself, she ends up passing out, entering the dreamscape. Freddie begins chasing her, tormenting her with the past where it shows everyone was happy and playing together, him drawing with her when her mother was late to pick her up. She eventually is chased into the boiler room. It's set ablaze, where she finally turns and confronts Freddie and states that she knows he's innocent and she's sorry. Her reminding him that she was a toddler, manipulated by an adult that she trusted and didn't actually want him to ever be harmed. The fire in the boiler room slowly begins to die out. Freddie lowers his hand, and his visage begins to change, the burns lifting off his skin. The last thing he says to Nancy in a broken and shuddering voice is, "You were always a good kid." Nancy is awoken by Quentin, and she says how she thinks she's done it. She's released Freddie's spirit. As they're driving back from the preschool, they see the old coworker's house, and there are police cars and an ambulance surrounding it. They don't slow down and instead speed up, going back to their homes. Each getting to their respective houses, they still live across from the street from each other, to find that they have been ransacked, blood everywhere, and they realize their parents are gone. They both step outside and realize that Freddie has not been appeased, merely moving on to his next targets. The movie ends with Nancy and Quentin staring across the street from one another, when around the neighborhood, in their friends' houses, screams begin to ring out through the night.